Grab your Bibles. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It is great to be with you all this morning. It's great to see everybody's smiling faces and to be back with you all. I want to welcome those who are joining us online as well. We're glad that technology allows us to be connected in such a wonderful way and to stay up with and hang out with each other, even if it is just virtually as well. By way of reminder, if you need a Bible, we have those. And we also have the bookmarks that are going along with the series of studies that we are currently doing. Not only am I seeking to teach you about Jesus, help you to know who he is, as we ask the question, who is Jesus today? But I also want to help you to study with others and to share that with others. And that's really the purpose of these, is to show and to help you in that endeavor to teach and talk to others. There are some movies that are just instant classics, whatever reason it might be. The Lion King is one of those instant classic movies. As soon as it came out, it was kind of in the heyday of Walt Disney, and it was just a favorite from the beginning. It might have something to do with the fact that it's loosely based on Hamilton, but regardless, it was just kind of one of those movies that just grabbed people. In the second half of the movie, Tafiti, the monkey, runs into Simba and tells him that his father is alive. And of course, he doesn't believe him. He says, well, come with me and I'll show you. And he takes him and they go on this crazy journey. And eventually he gets to this pond and he looks into the water and he's like, oh, that's just my reflection. He said, well, look harder. And he looks harder and he begins to see his father, and he looks up and he's seeing the image in the stars. And his father tells him that he's forgotten Simba has forgotten his father because he's forgotten who he is. Simba has forgotten who he is. And that's kind of the turning point for him to go and to then retake the mantle as king. In Simba 2, Simba's Pride, the beginning song is one that if you don't know it, you should go and look it up. But it's He Lives in You. And it's just a wonderful song that I really enjoy. Now, the story we're going to look at today is even more epic than what Walt Disney tried to portray here in this scene that I've tried to describe. So we're going to get into this as we kind of look at this question of who is Jesus. We have seen, as we have looked at the life and the ministry of Jesus, that he has power that seems to be beyond just a mere man. Right? He has calmed the storm. When they got to the other side, they were met by legion, and Jesus cast out this demon, or these demons that were possessing this man and destroying his life. He went across the other side and he was able to then heal a woman who had been sick for 12 years. He was then able to raise a dead girl back to life who had been dead. So we see that Jesus has the power. We see that he's able to do these amazing things. And we also saw, as we looked at the story of Jesus stopping and talking to this woman who had been suffering for 12 years, that Jesus is also very compassionate. He cares about us. He cares about us. But the question I don't know that we've really resolved as we've looked at these amazing stories is, who is Jesus? Who is he? Mark begins his gospel by telling you what he believes about Jesus. He says, this is Jesus, the Son of God. Well, that's a bold claim to make about somebody, that Jesus is the Son of God. So is that true? Well, John has laid out several different stories that have kind of explained that to us. In addition to that, we also have Legion saying that he is Son of the Most High God. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't really like to take the words of demons and take those and hold those fast. If we were to turn over to Mark chapter 1 and the baptism of Jesus, there is this voice from heaven that comes and says, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Well, that's more of the kind of statement I would like to listen to. But you might say, well, Mark was biased, the demon was confused, and the people who were present at Jesus' baptism was hearing things. So who is Jesus? Well, if you're still skeptical, we're going to look at some passages today that kind of help to explain that. Now, if you're following along specifically from the original study that I'm kind of basing all of this on, I'm moving things around a little bit. So you can decide if you follow the original or you want to follow my version of it. But we're going to go over and we're going to go from Mark chapter 5 to Mark chapter 9. Starting here in Mark chapter 9, we read, "And 6 days after, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and he led them up a high mountain by himself. And there he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became radiant, intensely white, like no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to him Elijah and Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to him, 'Rabbi, it is good that we're here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah.' For he did not know what he was saying, for they were terrified." Mark describes this situation where Jesus takes 3 of his closest disciples, and they go up on the mountain. Jesus was probably going to go up there and pray like he normally did, and he was bringing these guys along with him. And while he was there, he was transfigured. The Greek word is metamorphos, to be changed. And exactly what this transformation, this metamorphosis that Jesus went through in this moment was, we're not told exactly. We know that he changed in some way, but he was still recognizable. He was still himself, but he was different somehow. And his clothes were also changed. They were also transformed. They became bright white, brighter than anyone could bleach them. Right? So he's glowing. It reminds me of maybe Revelation, as John has this revelation later in his life of the glorified Christ. And he's standing kind of in the midst of all of these candlesticks, and that's kind of what it draws to my memory. But Peter, as he is looking at this, he makes an observation. He says, "Here is Moses. Here is Elijah. Jesus, I want to make you equal with them. It's good that we're here, that you are with these equal people." Now, who are Moses and who is Elijah? Especially in the Jewish mind, in Peter's mind, who are these men? Moses is the lawgiver, like the lawgiver. He was up in the presence of God. God's very finger wrote on that first set of tablets the 10 Commandments. He was in the presence of God so much that his face began to shone. He had to wear a veil while around the people. That's how close he was to God. Considered God's friend. He speaks to him face to face. So Moses brings the law. But what about Elijah? Elijah was the prophet of all prophets. A man of fire in his eyes. A heart on fire for the Lord. He walks into the king's court and says, "It's not going to rain until you change," and walks out. The whole army descends upon the land to try to find him, and he hides in a ravine, receiving his food from the birds. He goes up on Mount Carmel to have this showdown with the 400 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah. Has a showdown with the people. God sends fire down from heaven. He marches all of those evil prophets down, has them killed. marches back up the mountain and begins to pray that it would rain. Once it rains, he then goes back down the mountain and runs into town ahead of the king who is on his way back to the palace before the rain comes. I mean, this is a man with fire in his bones. The prophet of all prophets, afraid of nothing. And Peter sees Jesus amongst these two men, and he says, Jesus, it is right that we are here. Allow me to build a covering for you. Let me put you on the same level as Moses and Elijah. Wow, what faith Peter had in his rabbi. That he would consider Jesus equal to the lawgiver and the prophet of all prophets. But Peter was also a little scared out of his mind at the moment. So God wanted to confirm exactly what's going on here. We pick up our reading in verse 7. And a cloud shadowed them, and a voice came out of that cloud. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. And then suddenly, looking around, they were no longer with anyone, but only with Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man was raised from the dead. So they kept this matter to themselves, questioning what this raised from the dead meant. Jesus is in this moment glorified. Peter sees him, and his assumption is, I can bring my rabbi up to the level of the lawgiver, of the prophet. God says, it's not for you to decide who does and does not get covered here, but let me make this clear to you. This is my Son. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. God himself speaks from the cloud and declares that Jesus is his Son. When they pick themselves up off the ground, no one else is around, just Jesus. They're heading back down the mountain. And Jesus kind of stops and he turns to his disciples and he says, don't tell anyone what you saw today until after I have risen from the dead. And then somehow these men spend the rest of the time trying to determine what Jesus means by raised from the dead. That confuses them. It's quite a testimony to have God himself speak on his behalf. God rarely throughout human history intervenes like he does when the parting of the Red Sea, the giving of manna, the miracles that are worked through the prophets. Even more rare is God speaking, like as to Moses. But here God breaks the silence and says, this is my beloved Son. Quite a testimony. And we're left to kind of question that fact. Will we accept God's testimony? Will we listen to him? Will we listen to God, and will we listen to Jesus? Is Jesus really the Son of God? We've seen that he has the power. We've seen that he has the ability to do amazing things. And not only does he have the ability to do amazing things, but he chooses to do them because he cares. Mark has looked at the evidence and claims he is the Son of God. God has spoken now twice from heaven and proclaimed, this is my beloved Son. Even the demons have to admit that's who he is. Do we accept that testimony? Maybe you're not convinced. Well, let me give you one more example. If you turn over to Mark chapter 16, so if you're marking in your Bibles, put a little chain mark there and put Mark chapter 16, then turn over there to Mark chapter 16. Starting in verse 1, this is after Jesus' death upon the cross. If you're really new to the Bible, spoiler alert, Jesus dies. One of the main characters, real sad moment. Verse 1, when the Sabbath had passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. Very early upon the first day of the week, when the sun had begun to rise, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, who will roll the stone away for us so that we may enter the tomb? And looking up, they saw the stone had been rolled back, and it was very large. And entering into the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe. And they were alarmed. And he said to them, don't be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth. He was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See, the place where they laid him. Jesus had died upon the Roman cross, exhausted, beaten, died of suffocation, possibly even his heart giving out. You look at all the different situations and things that are described. Not believing that Jesus had already died upon the cross, they took a spear and they shoved it up through his side into his heart to confirm that he was indeed dead. They took him down and they buried him in a grave, in a tomb. They lay his body there. They did the initial anointing with the perfumes. They wrapped up his body, and they rolled this huge stone over the entrance. The religious leaders who had organized all of this said he had talked about raising from the dead. Put a squad of soldiers, 18, 20-some Roman soldiers, to guard it, seal the tomb with a signet seal. No one was to disturb it. Nobody was to open it. Make sure that the body stays there. They come upon the tomb, these ladies do, wondering, okay, who's going to roll the stone away for us? Not knowing that the Roman soldiers had been posted there, because when they had left, seeing where Jesus' body had been laid, they went back and observed the Sabbath. They observed the Passover meal. They came back at their very earliest convenience, when they were able, after the Sabbath was over, after the Passover was over, to anoint Jesus' body, to finish the process of honoring him. They did not expect him to be living. They had seen him die. They were shocked to see the stone had already been rolled away, and upon entering, they see an angel, a man dressed in white, saying, see, he's gone. They're shocked. They're shocked. Where could his body have gone? Later on, they would see him. He would appear to them. Over the period of 40 days, he would show himself, indeed risen. But where'd the body go? I mean, rised from the dead? Really? You expect me to believe that Jesus just rose from the dead? Let's go through 5 different possibilities. 5 different possibilities for what happened to the body of Jesus that explains away this idea of the resurrection. I mean, because Houdini was probably one of the best escape artists of all times. I mean, he got himself out of a lot of crazy messes that he put himself in. And he claimed that he also would rise from the dead. He's like, I'll get out of this death thing. And year after year, they've had people gather at his grave, and Houdini's still there. He hasn't gotten out. Do you really expect me to believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Well, let's go through a few options here. The disciples must have stolen the body, some would say. Okay, I will give you that they had motive to steal the body of Jesus. But I remind you there was 20-some Roman soldiers guarding the tomb who the only way they were going to let anybody get to that body was through their dead bodies. Because if they let anybody through and their bodies weren't dead, they would be dead. Because that would be the punishment for allowing that which they guarded to escape. So there is no way that these scared disciples, this measly crew, was able to take on the well-trained Roman soldiers. So they had the motive, but they didn't have the means. They had no way to get to the body of Jesus to steal it. The disciples couldn't have done it. It doesn't make any sense. While they had motive, they had absolutely none of the means. These were not war-hardened followers of Jesus. These were guys who ran at the first sign of danger. So if the disciples didn't steal the body, then where'd the body go? Well, maybe the religious leaders took the body of Jesus. Well, that's an interesting thought. They had the means. I mean, they were the ones who then bribed the soldiers when the body disappeared to say that the disciples had stolen the body. That first one was a very early story. You find that in Matthew chapter 28, 11 through 15. So they had the means to keep these soldiers safe and to spread this lie that the body had been stolen. But why would they steal the body? They put him there. They put him under lock. If the leaders had the ability to bring the body of Jesus out to the public and say, "See, he's still dead," they would have done it. So while they might have had the means, they didn't have the motive at all. They wanted him there. All right. You might say, and I definitely hear the men saying this, women are directionally challenged. They went to the wrong tomb. Okay. No. On multiple accounts. This doesn't follow either. One, they saw where Jesus' body had been laid. But you also have the disciples hearing the report that Jesus had been raised from the dead, also going to the wrong tomb again, if that's the case. This empty tomb. They go to the same tomb. So you have multiple people. And also, once again, the religious and political leaders could have simply brought the body of Jesus out and said, "No, you went to the wrong tomb. See, he's here. He's dead." But they didn't do that, did they? That was never the story. So it's not that they went to the wrong tomb. The tomb was under guard. This would have been an easy thing to have remedied by the leaders of the day. Some would say, well, Jesus didn't actually die. He passed out, he was exhausted, and he lay there in a coma in the tomb, and he revived later and walked out. Okay, you're telling me that Jesus walked all the way carrying his cross to Golgotha, whipped and beaten half to death, then hung upon the cross to the point of exhaustion, had a spear shoved up through his side into his heart to prove that he was dead. And then he was laid in a cold grave in a coma, and he just magically revives a few days later. Okay, even if that is even possible, that would take place, how's he getting out? You have Jesus, no food, no water for 3 days, so his body is continuing to deteriorate. No medical care. Wrapped up. Got like 70 pounds of spices laying on his chest. And even if he did get out of that and begin to move around in the tomb, you've seen that deal on Facebook. You know, the Roman soldiers are outside the tomb. Hey, what? Right? Jesus responds from inside the tomb. Everyone's kind of freaked out. Right? So even if Jesus wasn't alive inside the tomb, the Roman soldiers were there to keep him in. So they would have taken care of him if he could even get out. Remember, there was this huge rock in front of the door. So even if Jesus, weakened, beaten, battered, waking up in a coma, even if that was possible, how's he getting out? He's definitely not in any condition to be moving the door. And he's definitely not taking on 20 Roman soldiers who are there to make sure he is dead and stays that way. So that doesn't really work out either. Reaching for straws, we come to our fifth objection by the skeptic. Somebody else stole the body of Jesus. Some random grave robber stole the body of Jesus. It wasn't the disciples, it wasn't the religious leaders, just some random people. Okay, now we're really reaching for straw and grasping at this point. What would their motive be? Jesus was not buried with riches. When grave robbers go and they raid a tomb, they're after the valuables. They're not after the body. To what end? And upon what stipulation do you think that they would go and fight 20 Roman soldiers? It just doesn't make sense. So, my dear Watson, it's elementary. As unlikely as it might be, the only remaining possibility, however unlikely, has to be the answer. If the disciples couldn't steal the body, if the religious leaders didn't want to get the body taken care of, or to lose the body, if they had worked to maintain it, if they couldn't go to the wrong tomb, and the leaders couldn't present the body, and though anybody who maybe had means to steal the body had no real motive or benefit in stealing the body, the only option left is that Jesus indeed rose from the dead, as the Scriptures proclaim. One of the things that we have to come to grips with is the Bible that we hold in our hand is based upon a manuscript and textual evidence that is second to none in the ancient world. The amount of manuscript documents that back up the Greek text of our New Testament is just mind-blowing, to the point that any scholar who is being honest has to admit that what they wrote is what we have. You can disagree with it all you want. You don't have to believe it. But what we have in our hands is indeed what they wrote. Otherwise, there is no text from antiquity that you can trust. You have to throw out everything before we have originals. That's the only way it works. So you either have the original writing and you get to throw the whole Bible out, or we have some history before the invention of computers. I think we have some history before computers that we can trust. So I think what they wrote is what happened. You don't have to agree with me on that, but what they wrote is that Jesus rose from the dead. So the question then rests at your feet. You have to decide. Is Jesus the Son of God? Mark says he is. God proclaimed it twice from heaven. Jesus rose from the dead, triumphantly winning over that final horrible enemy of death. So do you believe that Jesus is who he said he is? That he is indeed the Son of God? I believe he is. We had a wonderful sermon last week, I think, that proved that he is. The Bible proclaims that he is, and just using reason, I can come up with no explanation for how that tomb was empty that Sunday morning. So praise the Lord, he's alive. From that point, we will then begin to look at the life of Jesus, because we know he has the power, we know he has the ability, we know he cares about us, and we know who he is. So the question now is, will you follow him? And we'll continue to examine his life as we head towards the cross on Easter. If there's any way that we can assist you in your walk of faith, we want to help you to do that. But I encourage you to pick up the resources and to share what you've learned with others.